Sunday Times are helping readers make a well-informed decision on the referendum. We are looking at certain key issues and getting alongside as many of the big campaigners as we can. You've heard us already today. I heard from Alistair Darling and Natalie Bennett. Let's move to the other side. Vote Leave campaigner, former Work and Pension Secretary. One of the big beasts, really, of the Leave campaign is Iain Duncan Smith. He's in the studio with me now to take your calls, and they're already coming in. And Mr. Duncan Smith, I will allow you to take those calls in just a second. But you arrive, sir. Good morning. Good to see you again, of course. Always good to see you in. With three front pages warning of a Brexit budget. Taxes will rise. A £30 billion black hole will open up. My listeners are going to be very concerned, aren't they, Iain Duncan Smith?
Yes, I have to say that I thought this was the most... of all the things I think that the Remain camp has done, this one probably is the most bizarre and the most ridiculous. I have to say it's showing behaviour from a Chancellor which more irresponsible than I've seen from any Chancellor at any time, in which this appears to be talking the economy down deliberately in the hope that somehow that will panic everybody, panic the markets in the next 7 days, and then force people to vote for Remain because they'll be so scared. So Project Fear has really gone completely into hyperspace, frankly, and I just don't think it's the way to conduct a campaign.
So he's playing fast and loose with the nation's finance, with the nation's future.
Yes, and I think let's just deal with this.
Well, he would point to if he were here, and I had Alistair Darling on the show earlier, Mr. Duncan, they point to this study, the study that says that these are the problems that would open up. Surely it is responsible for a Chancellor then to point to that.
Let me deal with that study. What he refers to when he talks to the IFS study, and the public should be aware of this, they did not conduct an independent study of where the economy would go. What they did was what's called a meta-study, which simply took a number of forecasts made by different forecasters, and then they've aggregated, a bit like a poll of polls, and then from that they've said, OK, well, if this was exactly correct, the downside risk of this would be that, and they then gave their forecast. The problem with that, of course, is the Treasury is a huge set of forecasts in the middle of that. And these Treasury forecasts were produced by the Treasury as a government in favour of Remain. And so they made a whole series of assumptions in their forecast 2 to 3 weeks ago that, first of all, we would get absolutely no involvement with the European Union. There would be massive trade barriers. We'd be able to do no trade deals with anyone in the world. And the economy, therefore, would turn down. And here's the deal. They said, first of all, it would turn down by 2%. By the way, a previous Treasury study a few weeks before said the economy would actually grow. So this is, again, a contradiction. But I couldn't figure out why. They then said there's a second downside risk of 6% fall, which, by the way, for listeners, would be bigger than the Depression in the 1930s, OK?
Right.
So they were forecasting that. I couldn't figure out why they'd done that. And then in the middle of it, Sajid Javid admitted that it was a biased report because he said it's not their job to do the upside of leaving, that's for the other side. Well, no, you're the Treasury, actually. You're meant to do a full range of forecasts. So no upside meant there's no corresponding set of figures, like a poll of poll, to give you a better average. So when I looked at this, and when the IFS did their study, of course they have to take into consideration the absolute extremes of the forecast. Treasury forecast with a 6% fall, which, as I said, is worse than the Depression. That, of course, meant that the IFS study was skewed so that it was a negative outcome, and on that basis, this is what this is all about today. It is a total manufactured issue, this. The Chancellor knows what he is doing, and the Remain group know what they are doing. They are setting out, without any doubt, to try and put fear and loathing through this campaign so that the public can be bamboozled by this. And the public should take a hold of one simple fact. The British economy is the 5th largest in the world, and the latest two sets...
Well, Osborne would say you damaged that, Mr.
No, hold on. The latest 2 sets of figures. They told us, during the run to this, there'll be terrible problems, people will hold back on their investments, and industry will suffer. No. The last figures a few days ago showed inward investment into the UK continues to rise despite any of this doubt. And the second point is manufacturing output has risen in the last set of figures, and that was announced out on Friday. So all the things they warned about are not true. And the Deutsche Bank, one last point,
yes,
Deutsche Bank, even in the last 48 hours, has actually said the likelihood, if we leave, is that British companies will actually outperform their European counterparts. So I'm sorry that the point is people should take a pace back and say this is a campaign tactic by a Remain campaign in a complete panic to talk down the economy, to try and get a whole crisis going.
From an irresponsible Chancellor.
I think this is most irresponsible that I have seen from anybody.
Who's cooked the books?
Well, they said themselves, Sajid Javid, the business secretary, on Radio 4 Today programme, when asked, surely every study, and that's true, every economist study should have an upside and a downside risk. There was no upside. When asked why not, he said, that's not our job to do, that's for the other side. I'm sorry, that is a Treasury document, and that document should be fair and impartial, and it was not.
If you bump into Mr. Osborne later today, what would you say to him, Mr. Duncan Smith?
I don't think we're bumping into each other, to be fair. We haven't done since I resigned.
Let's go to the first call. Adam's in Canary Wharf. Adam, you're through to Iain Duncan Smith. Go ahead, Adam.
Hi, good morning. I'm an extreme left-wing socialist, but I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Duncan Smith for being an honourable man, one of the few people in politics who has integrity, and he's also somebody who served this country. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
And could I move you to a question, Adam? Thank you for that preface.
The question is,
Yes.
you acted honourably when your situation became untenable and you realised that you were being asked to do unreasonable things. Do you think that this Prime Minister should resign when we realise the truth of the rubbish he's been coming out with?
Well, we're all angry and annoyed, as you say, about some of the tactics that have been used in this Project Fear. I've never been a believer in politics of trying to frighten people. I've always been a believer in the positives, so that you argue your case for the positives of doing it. So there should be positive arguments for remaining in the European Union, as much as I believe there are very positive arguments for leaving it. But at the end of this, whatever else one's personal views, and your views on that are clear, I would only say that we need, after this, immediately to have stability. If we vote to leave, we want stability in that government so that we can actually make progress immediately to start the discussions and talks with our European counterparts about how we then exercise our departure. And we want to do it as friends. We want to be able to do it with making arrangements about trade, which when I was in Germany 2 weeks ago, all the businessmen came up to me quietly and said, of course we'll have an arrangement because you're a fantastic market for us. So my view is that and I've said this before, I've never been about the Prime Minister resigning. This has always been for me about the campaign being one to leave.
And how
But I
confident would you
recognise
be,
other people have
how
different
much
views.
confidence would you have in Mr. Cameron being the man after a Brexit vote?
Well, my confidence is this, that when pressed on this the other day, he was asked, is there any chance that you would try and fiddle with this, or, if it's a vote to leave, is it only advisory from the British public? And to be fair to him, he said, if the British people say leave, that is a mandate. We have to go and exercise that. A vote to leave means leave, and I would set about doing that as though I had campaigned for it.
And how much confidence do you have in George Osborne staying in post in the event of a Brexit?
Well, today you may or may not be aware that in response to this, what I think is a ridiculous statement that's been made, some 57 Conservative MPs said they would vote against any such budget. Does
that include you, Mr. Duncan?
I'm on that list, absolutely on that list. I didn't resign from the government over issues around cuts of benefits without then also joining this call. I think it's nonsense, and I have no personal view. I'm not going to get personal about these things, but you can draw whatever conclusions you like.
So you don't think he's the man to be Chancellor after a Brexit?
I'm not going to form an opinion about that. I simply say, right now I'm focusing on winning this campaign.
Nicky's in Dorchester. Nicky, you're on the radio. Go ahead.
Oh, good morning, Iain. Now,
Morning.
my question is, we vote to leave, and they'll be followed by 2 years of negotiations with our EU partners at the moment. Now, if in 2 years the negotiations prove unsatisfactory for the UK and its citizens, could that bring about or trigger an early general election? And I'm talking now 2018.
Well, I'm not a great one at forecasting, so all I can give you is what I think and believe will happen. The first thing is important is that when we vote to leave, if the British people decide to leave, and I genuinely hope and believe in their interests that they do, then immediately what happens, we sit down and there are some things we can do internally. There are things, for example, like saying, OK, now we can look at amending the European Communities Act 1972, which gives the power of the courts in Europe to rule over us. That can be dealt with. And then we start and sit down with our European counterparts about the mechanisms of actually how we would continue after departure. And bear in mind, nothing immediately will happen in the sense that we vote. The public says we want to leave. We're still members of the European Union at that point. We're still, accessing everything that we need to access, and then we sit down with them whilst that's still in place to actually resolve how how access is afterwards. And we have some red lines. We absolutely want control of our borders, so there's no deal at all on the table that will be acceptable if we don't get control of our borders. And we want to be able to have complete control of our government and our laws, and also to be able to make our own arrangements outside of the European Union Union, with our trade. And so within that context, we would sit and discuss with our European counterparts. And I said earlier, and I touched on this, I was in Germany the other day, where I had a debate. It's actually kind of me versus the rest of Germany, but I'd like to think that I won that one. But afterwards, I sat down with a number of German businessmen, and they all said quietly to me, look, we daren't say anything in public over here, but every business person in Europe knows quietly this is going in the wrong direction for the European Union. We want, in a sense, you to succeed because we need to change this, and we desperately will want to do a deal with you no matter what. So I can't forecast elections, I'm sorry about that, but I can say it should be a positive process.
Thanks, Nicky. Alex is in Camden. You're through to Iain Duncan Smith. Go ahead, Alex.
Hello, Ian.
Hello, Alex.
First of all, I think, you're an ex-Conservative leader. You were painted up as somebody, Ian, who was going to reform benefits and it was going to work out for people on benefits. But under your leadership, it's been a disaster on the benefit system. You stepped down on this issue of Europe. You didn't step down on some of the principled issues against disability benefits. Now you've taken that decision, you've taken that stance. Why, and this is my question, why are you, Ian, prepared to put the economic and financial future of this country on the line for this, what is effectively a waste of time vote by the British public? It's a waste of time vote to take us out of the European Union. Why won't you let us negotiate our way through?
All right, stay on the line. Let's get some response. I'll probably bring you back in, Alex. Iain Duncan Smith, you're, in a way, what you said George Osborne is doing, you're doing, in fact, the same, gambling with the nation's future, economic future.
First of all, I resigned over a long-standing series of rows over at least the last 12 months about where the narrative about support for social justice would be. I didn't resign over the European issue. I would have been free to debate and argue on Europe anyway, so it wasn't about Europe, and after this is all over, I intend to return to that process about how you bring proper reform and complete the process of giving greater power and greater economic strength to people at the lowest level. But my big point here in answer to your question is, why would we not sit around and ask for more reform, which is pretty much what you're saying? It's worth reminding ourselves that the Prime Minister set out to get a reformed European Union. This argument is, by the way, not a waste of time. No debate that ever has a public vote is ever a waste of time. I'm a believer in that democracy. But the point I'd say is that I'll give you a list of the issues that he said were wrong with Europe and we needed to get changed, and they are 8 points. One is devolve social and employment legislation back to the nation so that we don't get overruled all the time in trying to run our own affairs. Opt out of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which places huge requirements on us and allows them to intervene in our courts. Limit the power of the European Court of Justice, which is now the Supreme Court. Stop the wasteful moving of the EU Parliament from Brussels to Strasbourg. That's £100 million every year spent on that. Reform the common agricultural policy, which in many senses is almost immoral. I mean, here we fund and finance the growing of sugar beet across the European Union, when actually countries in places like the Gulf the Gulf in Africa and in the Caribbean, they grow sugarcane, which is near 100% sugar. So this is, stopping them trading, etc. Structural funds, which are hugely out of control and expensive, massive treaty change, and most of all, border control. All of those he said he wanted. My point was, if there was ever a time when the EU might have granted something, it was on the prospect of Britain voting to leave. They didn't grant any of that. Not one single one of those things was granted. So, I'd love to be able to negotiate with them and get those things. The truth is, they're not interested. They don't want to change. This is a supranational body run by a commission of unelected people and a court which we don't have any ability to change. My view is it's time to come out. It's time to take control of our own affairs. And I hope improve the quality of life for the British people, which I believe is likely.
Quick response from you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I think, Ian, what worries me is you're selling the public a lie. When you talk about the market, you know fully well that the European Court of Justice regulates that market. It's a court. We have courts in this country. No politicians can tell the courts what to do in this country. So why would Britain be able to tell the ECJ what to do? And the other thing is, you're not just selling us a lie, but our financial future, our economic future. Osborne, who you've supported for the last however many years, since 2010, you're now telling us Osborne is a liar. You're telling us that David Cameron is a liar. That's what you want us to believe. You want us to believe that all your mates that you've been in government with, they're all liars.
No, this is a debate, okay? I disagree with them fundamentally. What I'm simply saying to you is, by the way, the Court of Justice isn't just a court, all right? The Court of Justice is a supreme court in Europe. Now 60% of our laws are being made by the Commission in Brussels, not by the UK Parliament. That means it goes into all areas of our life. It's not just about the market. You know, it's only in this country we have this ridiculous idea that somehow the European Union is about a marketplace, a lovely benign area, which a free market. We don't have a free market. Financial services has never been completed as a free market, and the reality is that all of the qualified majority voting over the years stretches into all sorts of areas, from social policy right the way through across into economic policy. And, you know, the risks of remaining are we will remain in an area that is marred in recession, with unemployment rates for some areas in 40, 50 and 1.60% youth unemployment. These are staggering problems, and Greece is in a complete and constant state of crisis. Italy hasn't grown for over 10 years. My view about this is we can do better. We'll still be friends, still cooperate, still be part of NATO, still trade with them. That's what we want to do, but we don't want to be run by them. That's the key.
Is Mr Cameron wholly, fundamentally, totally wrong on everything he says?
Well, my belief is that Mr Cameron knows that, as he said a few months ago, that if Britain left the EU, he said, of course, it would thrive and prosper. We seem to have lost those words in this debate. I wish it was a bit more balanced. And he said, we could thrive and prosper. We are the fifth largest economy in the world. We have some of the greatest entrepreneurs, greatest business people, the hardest working people that I've come across in any country. I have huge belief in Britain, and I therefore am optimistic for their future because I believe in British people.
June is in Saundersfoot, and you're through to Mr Duncan Smith. Go ahead, June.
Hello, Ian.
Hello, June.
What I'd like to ask you is, last night I watched a programme about immigration in which you took part. And what I'd like to know is, we keep hearing about the contribution that Eastern European migrants make, and we see them working on farms, working in the service industry, doing all sorts of jobs like that. But we have more immigration from outside the EU. And what I want to know is what contribution do these people make to our economy, and what jobs do they do? Because I never see them. You don't see them in the farms planting vegetables or in cafes.
All right, let's see to Mr Duncan Smith your response.
Well, let's get the migration figures correct. The first thing is that EU migration is rising faster. At the moment, external migration from outside the EU is pretty much static. If anything, it's slightly falling. But migration from the EU has been rising. These are the second highest rise in EU migration on record. So let's have a look at who's coming over. The Bank of England published a report back in December last year in which they pointed out quite clearly two very important factors. The first is that EU migrants predominantly do low-skilled, low-wage jobs, whereas migrants coming in from outside the EU have tended to be much higher skilled. So you get a lot of nurses and doctors
IT.
and engineers and IT people coming in. And not all of them, by the way. We still get others coming in who are low skilled, but the balance is predominantly higher skill, lower skill for the EU migrants. And my concern about that, the Bank of England report also said, for every 10% rise in migration, you see about a 2% fall in the incomes in the UK for lower paid, low skilled workers. So although they talk about the contribution they make, many of these come in for a period of a year or so and then leave again, not having any real commitment to the UK at all. But the problem is that many of those wages have been driven down at the lower end of the income scale. That has a direct effect on British workers who have families, housing costs, etc. And they are under pressure to accept, as a result of that, lower wages. Now, we want to raise the minimum wage, but even if you raise the minimum wage and what happens is it drives it down, you still end up bumping along at the bottom of the minimum wage, even if that's legal. And then, of course, there's all the temptation for businesses to be illegal. So, first of all, migration is far too large. We had a manifesto pledge to get it to tens of thousands. I want to do that. But my view is very simple. I don't see why it's unreasonable to say that a country like Britain, the fifth largest economy in the world, should not control its borders and therefore be able to decide what skills it wants to bring in to add value to the economy, but not, and we don't need, huge numbers, which we've had, of people doing low-skilled work in the UK.
June, thank you. Sham in Barnet. Go ahead, Sham.
Oh, good morning, Ian. Good morning,
Sham.
Nick.
Hello, sir.
I'm partial to leaving but I have a property in France, which I've had for sort of 10 years and enjoy the benefits of every six times a year. How would the leaving adversely affect me?
Well, I don't think it'll affect you at all.
When do you have to queue to get into France? When do you be queuing at Paris or wherever he has to go at the airport with his passports and everything?
You queue anyway, frankly. You have to go through passport control because we have passport controls here. So
no
people who come
check
here,
on travel?
I don't believe there's any change there. And the other thing is,
taxation. Will you be any tax matters?
Tax matters are all French tax matters. They're nothing to do with us.
More expensive airfares, according to the Prime Minister, Mr.
I don't believe a word of that, by the way, because the demand for travel around the world is what drives airfares up or down. So low-cost airlines. By the way, I can't remember which one of the low-cost airline heads it was.
It was Ryanair.
Ryanair, who originally said, not so long ago, that he didn't think it would have any effect on low-cost fares, and then suddenly, because he's pro staying in the EU, he said it would be higher. I don't believe. All this speculation is speculation. I, for example, have lived and studied out in Europe. I love Europe. I mean, I consider myself a European. I just don't like the EU. The EU is not Europe. So
Will you still be a European if you're a Brexiter, though?
Yeah, of course you can, because, this is a continent which we are involved with, but we just don't want to be run by the European Union. The European Union is not Europe. Europe's diversity, its language, its culture, its...
Bolting the door to the biggest single market on earth,
it's all total rubbish. As I said, Germans and others, I've been travelling around 2 years, they all want to deal with this. But in answer to Sham's question, the personal position is my sister went out to work in Italy before we really got involved with the EU. She's lived and worked there all her life, so she's experienced both systems, and other members of my family have been out in Italy and lived there and everything else, and so there is no issue about this, I promise you. And the same for foreign nationals living here, generally contributing to us. They're more than welcome to stay.
Sham, thanks. Hassan in Slough, you're through to Iain Duncan Smith. Hassan.
Hi, morning, Ian.
Hassan, nice to see you.
I'd like to know how the Brexiters would unite, or how the Tory party could unite behind David Cameron after the referendum, because I do not want to see a repeat of what I witnessed way back in 1996-97 at the Tory conference, where the rebels actually brought down John Major's government, and that ushered in 3 terms of Tony Blair.
OK, well, it sounds to me like you're a Conservative. That's great. My answer to that is very simple. I've already said all along that this is about leaving the EU. This is not about the Prime Minister. And my view about this is he's already said if the vote is to leave, he will stand by that vote, and our job is to get around him, to help him.
He's got a rebellion on
to
his
make
hands,
sure
hasn't he? There's nearly 60 of you ready to vote down this supposed emergency.
Yeah, but
the party's split, isn't it?
Well, at the moment it is divided, but the Labour Party's divided as well. And
let's talk about the Conservative Party.
Yeah,
how are the Conservatives going to get together?
It's a huge subject. Well, very simply because we've all recognised that once we've done this, once the British people make a decision, that's it. For me, I accept the decision one way or the other, and my job is therefore to get on and support the government to try and govern properly. I will have my own views about the reasons why I resigned, to do with social justice.
But Mr. Cameron would have to go if it's a Brexit.
I don't believe that, because I think he has always said all along that his position is he will accept the result of the referendum and he will work pretty much as though that had been his view.
The party to lead, won't he, Mr. Duncan?
Well, the party will be behind him.
The party will be behind a Prime Minister who's campaigned like that, who's a tissue of lies that he put out every single day.
I know this debate is very heated, and I know that it's bound to be, and I know that people find it very difficult to recognise that there's some kind of family dispute and everyone is going to go their separate ways. But the thing about politics, I honestly believe, is that the Conservative Party is focused on this as an issue right now, and in just over a week's time it will be settled one way or the other. So the answer is there is no point in rowing or debating about that any longer. We have a government to run for the next 4 years. He had a mandate last year to get on with that governing. Additional to that now is to get the process of leaving sorted if we vote to leave, and that will be something that he has committed to doing.
We've only got a minute left. Thank you for the call, Hassan. Let me try and feed in a couple of email questions. This from Graham in Bushy. Is David Cameron taking us for idiots that Turkey won't be a member of the EU until the year 3000? Iain Duncan Smith, when do you think Turkey? How real is the possibility of Turkey joining?
Well, I thought this weekend the most revealing thing was these emails, etc., from Foreign Office officials officials out in Ankara and elsewhere saying basically we're going to have to we're going to speed up the visa-free access as a start, and if they don't grant Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, an early process of entry into the European Union, he'll simply let all of the migrants come across, and that'll cause mayhem. And we know that. We know the Commission is holding back on all decisions. So I'm sorry, I just don't agree. My belief is that Turkey is on a fast track to join the European Union. It's a statement of fact. It's what the Prime Minister said is government policy. And the Commission knows if they don't do it, they'll end up with another huge migrancy crisis on their hands within a matter of days.
Rachel in Bexley, how close are we to having an EU army?
Well, they already passed the legislation within to allow it to be formed. Clearly, nation-states still have the right to say no to joining it, but they can't stop it actually being created. That's the point. So we would not join that I understand and accept. But what is taking place is a genuine drive by the EU Commission and others to actually create a defence force, an EU army, that they can then use. And that frightens me, frankly, because if you look at the way they behaved over the Ukraine, shocking lack of leadership, I just think NATO and nation-states like Britain are the cornerstone to the defence of Europe, not the European Commission.
And lastly, Mark in Essex. Iain Duncan Smith's given too many Brexit lies to mention in a text. Ask him why the stock market and the value of the pound fall every time a poll shows a Brexit majority. And to illustrate that, Mr Duncan Smith, I'm sure you've already seen the front page of the Financial Times. Swing to Brexit fuels turmoil, global flight to safety smashes records. That's what happens if we get a Brexit, Mr Duncan Smith.
Yeah, well, actually, what you're getting, and the reality is always with this, in a sense, it's a bit of a casino, really, in the stock market. They're all trying to guess what the result will be, so you get people buying on a rumour, selling on a fact. That's
a chance of talking down the economy.
If you've got people going around saying this, of course you're going to get this turmoil in the course of a referendum. But, I remember when the ERM was on and all of the economists told us to leave would be a disaster, we'd crash, economy would sink. I seem to have heard this before. It sounds like it again today. In actual fact, we didn't. We grew and we boomed, and the British economy improved dramatically. My point was immediately after that, what happened with a lower level of sterling, we started exporting. More jobs were created. So, honestly, right now, you will get turmoil either way. But that turmoil, I don't believe, is long-lasting. I think it'll stabilise, and we'll end up being in a much better position.
Vote leaves Iain Duncan Smith. Thank you for your time and taking the calls. Thanks, Mr Duncan Smith. You're listening to LBC with me, Nick Ferrari, at breakfast. The 9:30 news now. Lisa Aziz.